Now we're going into non-Audrey territory, folks, with Thomas Gets Bumped, the 6th episode of the 3rd series, based on the magazine stories Hello Thomas and A Bump on the Line written by Andrew Brenner. As I said, this was the first episode of the series to not be based off of a story from Wilbert Awdry or Christopher Awdry, but it was based on 2 magazine stories by Andrew Brenner, the future showrunner of Thomas, and Brittlecroft and David Mitton decided to adapt this story since it seemed like a Thomas the Tank Engine story to them. But is it worthy of being part of the Thomas franchise? Let's dive into the story. Every afternoon, Thomas puffs along his branch line with Annie and Campbell. First they pass the watermill, then come to a big farm and see a village nestled on either side of it. Whenever children hear Thomas coming, they stand on the bridge to wave at him until he's out of sight. One day, Thomas is waiting at a signal to talk to some children. Percy is waiting too and teases Thomas that if he is late, the Fat Controller will substitute him. Thomas scoffs at Percy but is secretly concerned. The next day, Thomas sees an inspector waving a red flag as he approaches the station. He sees some children waving at him on the bridge too, and he becomes concerned as it is a good station. The children ask Thomas to take them home, and the station master explains to the driver that the school bus broke down. The children climb aboard Annie and Campbell, and Thomas takes them to the next station where Bertie has waited to take them home. When Thomas finishes his job, he is very late and worries that the Fat Controller will be cross with him, which Percy knew would happen and tells James he warned Thomas. The next morning, Thomas is relieved that the Fat Controller is nowhere to be seen at the station.
Thank goodness, sighed Thomas.
But his fears worsen when the rails on his branch line buckle from the hot temperature. He tries to stop in time, but it's too late and he derails on the buckled tracks. Thomas is concerned for his passengers, but his driver assures him that they will be looked after. Later, he is sent to shunt trucks in the yard while the workmen repair the line. Bertie the bus takes Thomas's passengers for him, but makes more stops to let people off closer to their homes. And Thomas worries that he's lost his passengers and that Bertie will replace him. However, after the line is repaired, the Fat Controller announces to Thomas that his timetable will be changed so that he and Bertie can work together more often. To Thomas's relief, the passengers say that while Bertie is a nice buzz, they miss Thomas and are glad to see him back, and he thanks Bertie for taking care of them while his line was being repaired. Bertie prefers that while he likes making new friends, he likes sharing them with him. Thomas then tells Bertie that he is a good friend. This episode marks the first time that an episode will be based off of a magazine story from Andrew Brenner, who, as I said, would go on to serve as head writer of the series beginning in 2013, Kin of the Railway. And one thing I recently found out after doing research for this episode was the fact that Andrew Brenner later publicly expressed annoyance during an interview with SIF that his stories were being used without his consent or credit. And having rewatched the episodes myself back then and not seen his name in any of the credits, I can understand. I mean, you'd be pretty pissed off as well if your stories were used without consent and they wouldn't give you credit for it. But even though it was used without his consent or credit, it is a really good episode. I honestly don't remember reading any of those magazine stories, which is funny because I used to buy the Thomas magazines when I was a kid. But this episode really is a good mashup of both those stories. And the whole buckled railway storyline thing would be reused in series 20. But that episode was done different enough so that it wouldn't be a copy and paste of this episode. And this is another episode that I really enjoyed when I was a kid. It's very clear that Andrew Brenner loved the franchise so much, and he did research into railways when he wrote those stories, since railway lines can buckle and bend when they're exposed to heat. This happens quite a lot on railways. The lines get so hot that they buckle and bend under the heat wave, and then they have to be replaced so that engines don't crash. Whether or not you knew that this episode was based on an Audrey story or not, it's still a really good episode, and it does feel like something that would have come from the Railway series, in my opinion. And it's good that we see Bertie the bus getting some spotlight once again. Of course, he doesn't appear as much as Thomas or any of the other characters do, but it's still a nice spotlight episode for him, and it's a good reminder that while the two are frenemies, they still get along really well most of the time, and they're happy to put their differences aside and help out when the passengers are in need.
Thank you for looking after my passengers. That's all right, Thomas. I like to make new friends, but I'm glad to share them with you. You're a good friend indeed, replied Thomas, and always will be.
Thomas Gets Bumped is one of those episodes where there's no runaways, no chase scenes, no huge crashes, except for the crash that Thomas does. It's just another one of those days in the life of Thomas's branch line episodes that we often need for the TV series. As I've mentioned a number of times before, Thomas the Tank Engine and friends didn't always need a big spectacular episode where something exciting, exhilarating and threatening happened. Sometimes they just needed a simple episode that's just a slice of life. That's part of what makes this TV series so enjoyable back then. Thomas Gets Bumped is another one of those episodes that I really look forward to watching whenever I put it on DVD. And it's an episode that I do recommend checking out if you haven't seen it for a while. You'll enjoy watching this adaptation of one of Andrew Brenner's stories, and it's just a nice slice of life episode that we often need for the TV series. It's definitely worth watching.